Welcome to the second of our Expansive Education webinars. My name is Bill Lucas. It's my pleasure to be with you for the next 40 minutes or so, and our topic today is parental engagement. Actually, to be more precise, it's about a different kind of parental engagement. It's about changing the conversation that we have with parents when we're teachers or head teachers or anyone working in schools. Now, I mentioned expansive education then. Let me just go back before I start my talk proper. Expansive education is a phrase that Guy Claxton and I coined nearly a decade ago now, and it has four elements. The first is about an expansive view of education, so really cultivating capabilities as well as deep love and knowledge of subjects. The second is, as the name expansive suggests, that our own intelligence is expansive. And the third, and this is the focus of today's conversation, the third is about a geographical expansion, moving out from school into the community and really engaging with families and communities and all the kinds of groups and activities you'd expect to find there. And the fourth, which will be the subject of a later webinar, is what happens when you expand the role of teachers from teachers to learners and learners to researchers. So let's begin. Expanding, changing, shifting the conversation about the way that we engage with parents as educators. A little while back, my colleague Guy Claxton and I wrote a book directly to parents. We imagined, and some of you will have seen the film Educating Rita, we imagined that Rita is now a grandmother and she has a granddaughter in a school near you. And we started to think out loud about the kind of capabilities that we'd like this imaginary Ruby to have in her school. And they're these kind of words beginning with the letter C. So centrally, being curious, being willing to collaborate and work with others, being a great communicator, being creative and knowing how to be creative in different situations, being committed, really staying with things, persevering, keeping going when the going gets tough. Being a craftsman, well, Ruby might not like being called a craftsman, but you know what I mean. Somebody who never does less than their very best. And finally, having that confidence, which is born of really working hard at things, having a can-do mindset, or as Carol Dweck might put it, a growth mindset. Now, as I talk you through the kind of things that you might like to do with parents and that parents might like to do with you, I'm as well as thinking about subjects going to be thinking about these kinds of capabilities. And the reason for that is that, and here was something that was quite shocking to Guy and me when we began to write the book, we began to realize that children are actually not as happy as they should be today. Report after report that we read, conversation after conversation that we had with parents and with their children said that, you know what, although it's always been tricky growing up, the reported well-being of children in the UK is not as good as it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. Why is that? And we just wonder whether some of the answers to that why is that question might lie in a better relationship between home and school. I'm sure that the pressures of modern life are part of it. I'm sure that social media may be part of it. And as I say, it's always been tricky growing up. The UNICEF report was particularly challenging to us. We're a developed country, and the last time I looked at the last survey, we were number 16 out of 29 developed countries in terms of the reported well-being. That's the reported happiness of children. So all's not well, and I'm just wondering out loud with you why that is. Because we as educators are dealing with parents and children who apparently are finding life tough at the moment. And of course, it's not just the children. It's the parents too. In England, we're one of the most over-tested societies, educational administrations in the world. And if, like me, I'm a parent, if as a parent you've often wondered how your child is doing at school on the latest test, you may yourself have just felt just a whiff of the same stress that they're experiencing. You've kind of been there vicariously with them. Our image of school is also a little outdated. It's all too easy to see how school is a single one-off episode, rather than thinking of a lifetime of learning into which school is just one part. And in everything I'm talking about today in terms of our relationship with parents, my understanding, my strong belief is that while school is a really important place and time of life in and of itself, we want our kids really to love school and to get a lot from it. It's also a preparation for a lifetime of learning, what David Perkins at Harvard calls life-worthy learning. There are so many things that we want our children to learn, and there are so many ways in which parents can help us in that enterprise. And it's a joint enterprise, isn't it? Parents are our first educators, and they're in many ways the most profound influence on us in our lives. Of course school matters, and of course our friends matter, and they matter more as we grow older. As I said, growing up is not easy, and it's ever so easy, isn't it, at times for any side to blame the other. So for schools to blame parents and parents to blame schools. So it's an important premise of what I'm talking to you today about, that we shouldn't do that blame game. We're in this together, things will go wrong, and one of my themes is going to be the enduring power of communication, keeping the channels of communication open at every stage, every step of the way. Because parenting's hard, isn't it? This is a sad slide, and I do hope that no ducks were killed in the filming of it. In fact, if you want your own personal copy of it, then Google image bad parenting. You'll see that I've taken off the phrase bad parenting because it's unkind, it's pejorative. And one of the premises of what I'm talking about is that we're kind of in this together. Schools are, after all, in loco parentis. That means the legal framework governing everything we do in schools is that we are as if we're parents. And it's hard. You don't need to just be thinking about those school trips where you count them in and count them out and discover that you're one down as a result, and they've slid, as it were, through the grid into whatever that image might suggest it is, a flowing drain underneath. So it's complicated, it's tricky, and being real about that is almost the most important thing we can do. So offering opportunities for parents to talk about how tough it is, what's going on, what's going well, what's going less well, as it were, being a sort of informal problem page for parents is important. If you've had children, and as I've said, I have, and I still have, it's as if we're constantly learning. Our L plates are flapping. It's not, you don't go through the driving test and then emerge the other side a fully fledged driver. No way, sadly. In fact, it has been known that things can go wrong. You find yourself shouting at your youngster, your teenage daughter, and in case you're thinking this is skewed unfairly against dads, of course it can be equally easily the mum who's shouting at her teenage daughter, and in case you're worried about some incipient sexism here, it could just as easily be a boy who's driving you up the wall, or indeed that you're driving up the wall, because that's going to be part of the process. It reminds me sometimes when I think of this, this lovely quotation from Mark Twain. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly bear to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished by how much he'd learned in 7 years. Of course, as children grow up, they don't always want us around. That's something else we're going to have to get to grips with, isn't it? So how you do parental engagement at primary is going to be different from how you engage with your teenage, soon growing up as individuals in their own right, young people at secondary. And that's part of the complexity. And as a parent, we are going to have all sorts of choices, aren't we, about the style by which we go about parenting. And that's going to mean that as teachers, who also have choices about the style with which we teach, the style with which we deal with parents, we need to be aware that different parents will have different ways of doing things. And for some, their default instinct will be to tell their child, to give them advice in a way that's more like telling. And for others, it'll be more that sort of coach on the side, how can we work this out together? And both are appropriate, both are needed in different situations. You don't want to wait and have a chat about something if you think your child is in imminent danger. But on the whole, I'm going to be suggesting that the style of parenting that we're looking to create is more of a coaching style. And that's going to have some resonance when we think about the different things that schools can do. I think of all the people I know, and it's been my privilege to work with Joyce Epstein, it is Joyce's framework and Joyce's wisdom about parental engagement that offers us a helpful way of viewing this pretty complex endeavour. And Joyce suggests that there are 6 different ways of thinking about parental engagement. They're not ways as in the only ways, and obviously some of them will overlap with others. But I wonder if this helps you, and I offer it to you in that spirit. So first of all, there's all the things we can do under the heading parenting, where we're helping parents and families to be better parents, to think about the things that they can have in place, not just to do all the basics of making sure their children have enough food in their belly and they know what's going on at school, but actually also have strategies for praising their children, for supporting their children, for helping their children organise their learning lives. The second of these is communication. So important. And in a world of email and text and Twitter and Facebook, the opportunities here are growing considerably, and we need to wise up to that. And schools that are doing great work in this area are indeed well wised up to that. There's something too about engaging with the talents of parents and thinking about how we can use parents. I don't mean use in any critical way, but how we can engage parents to share their talents. Most parents want to do this. They certainly do when their children are younger, but we sometimes make it tricky. We surround them with complicated vocabulary, or we don't make it easy for them to feel at home in our space, and our space is the school when we're speaking as teachers. The fourth area, and I think in many ways the most important, and you'll see why as I move through this talk, is to provide high quality information so that parents at home can really support their children's learning. Not teaching them in the same way that we're teaching them in school, but finding all sorts of other ways in which they can play that role. The fifth, and not all schools will necessarily want to go down this road, is to actively involve involve parents in taking a decision-making role. If that's a little too far at this stage for you, then you might like to think about reconfiguring the relationship you have with your parent-teacher association. The UK's PTA, Parent-Teacher Association, is an exciting body trying to move into the direction where it'll be more actively, proactively supporting parents to get closer to schools and understand the kind of decisions and questions that they're taking and making about learning. And finally, obviously, there's a community resource issue, really understanding how your community can help. So finding out the talents of all the parents that you have in your parent group. So I guess there's a series of questions here, which if you're watching this talk from me, you might like to take away. And you might like to pose these questions to your own staff, and not just to your own staff, but to your parent group. You might like to ask them what they're currently doing in under these different headings. And here are just a few ideas drawn from schools across the world. Let's take the idea for parenting, that we might proactively use the school's website to suggest ways in which parenting for learning can be developed. So not just explaining what we're going to be teaching and learning next week, but specifically suggesting things that parents might be doing. We might even, and this is a risky area, but we might choose to express clearly our expectations about such things as time spent on homework, time spent on informal learning, time spent with the TV screen, time spent using computers and where you use them and how you use them in the house, and of course all the social media that goes with that, and perhaps more positively the enormous value of talking to and reading to and with your children, and you as an adult modelling all the things that you like doing. Under the heading of communicating, we might think not just, well, we should of course be telling our parents what we're going to be teaching their children coming up, but we should be much more finely grained in what we're suggesting. So maybe every week or every fortnight, just focusing on a particular subject and giving a very precise suggestion of something that parents might like to do. We're learning history, and you might like to take your child to the local historic house to look at something. We're learning maths, and you might like to take the maths games that we've left in the school reception area and enjoy playing times tables against the clock in whatever game it is, and so forth. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you get the idea. So a first step, if you're watching this as a school and you're thinking about the professional learning you might encourage your colleagues to do, would be to start to pool all the good things that you're doing already, start to look up and look out and talk to other schools, and really start to get even more organised about the different ways in which you can support your parents so that they can support your children and you can support your children. Because we know the literature here is really clear. We know that there are 3 powerful, compelling reasons why parents might want to get engaged in schools and why you as an educator might want parents to do just that. The first and most obvious in this world of Ofsted dominance and league tables is that the classic achievement measures will increase. Not like night after day, it's not a magic fix, but they will get better. There's really good literature from people like Charles Deforge a decade or more ago on this. The second is, and there's growing emphasis on this in some of the more psychological research at the moment, that they'll develop social confidence. Their social attitudes will be improved. Look no further than the Sutton Trust's work on this, for example, or the Education Endowment Foundation. And thirdly, and this is where the world of educating Ruby, with which I started, and the world of the kind of thing I'm saying to you now intersect, it really matters how children think of themselves as learners. And the bridge between that is not the child per se, it's the parent. So we might be doing some really exciting things in terms of helping children to persevere when they get stuck in our classrooms. But hypothetically, if when they get home, the first response of the parent is to help them out, or even to say, don't bother trying with that, that's going to undermine everything that we're doing in school. And of course, it could be the other way around. It could be that the parents, the community, the family is the resource for really great learning, and in a funny sort of accidental way, we're doing it unhelpfully in school. So how we think of ourselves as learners, those 7 C's that I suggested Ruby might have, they're an agenda for all children, and therefore for our focus of attention when we're talking about parental engagement. Now, there's some pretty obvious things here. This pie chart or cake, it describes the differential between the amount of time that children spend in school and the amount of time they spend out of school. And it's obvious, isn't it, that children spend many more of their waking hours in our care, so not at school. So simple mathematics would suggest that that's really going to be important, isn't it, in getting through to the parents and making sure that all the things that we do in school are in some ways supported, reinforced, encouraged, and possibly sometimes challenged and developed. There's something else going on here, and that's a little unclear on this site, forgive me, on this slide, so I'll just read it out to you. But it is that as we get older, the impact of school becomes greater. And as we're younger, so at age 7, the impact of the parent is much greater than the impact of school. At about the age of 11, it equals off. And in secondary school, increasingly, the influence of peers and of parents, peers and of school increases. So we need to think not just about parental engagement as a concept, but how it might look and feel differently at different stages of children's life. There are 3 aspects of character which it turns out are really important. The first of these is helping children to get better at self-control, self-regulation, knowing how to manage their emotions when they get into tricky situations. The second of these is helping them read others. It's what we might call in the grown-up land emotional intelligence, helping them to be empathic, to walk in others' shoes, to understand what it looks like from other people's perspectives. And the third of these is persistence, what Angela Duckworth, or close to what Angela Duckworth calls grit. These things are really important, and they're things that sit very nicely between what the school does and what the home does, because in all of the things that we do from school and home, we can be encouraging these kinds of things. It is, interestingly and challengingly, what parents do at home that has the greatest impact on children's achievement. And it turns out that it's communication and talk which is mission critical here. You may know this little interaction between Spot and Spot's owner. Spot's owner here, I've taught Spot to whistle. Oh, I can't hear him whistling. No, I said I taught him to whistle, not that he'd learned. It's true of many schools that we think we've communicated because we've sent a letter in a bag which has got eaten by the spot that lives at home. Or we've sent an email and we assume that it's read. Or we've sent a text and we've assumed that it's been received and acted upon. And of course, it's a two-way street, and that often doesn't happen. So if talk is important, what kind of talk really counts? Well, the kind of talk that has you put your mobile phone away and really listens to and engages with children. The kind of talk that starts from a premise that feelings are really important. So it seems to me that you're seeming sad and checking in with your child, or you as the teacher talking about with parents how they deal with these tricky matters of feelings. Talk that is about solving problems. So a child who's distressed or is finding homework difficult or a situation with friends difficult, rather than leaving it there, talking to the child, and it could be the teacher or the parent here, how could we work that through together? How could we make that better together? Not doing it for them, but doing it with them. Here's the coaching style that I spoke of earlier on. And always more questions than answers. Always question. Not trying to close down your child's creativity, your child's imagination, but assuming that questions will sometimes even breed questions. And that state of curiosity, that one of Ruby's 7 C's, is really to be described. And perhaps most importantly of all, encouraging a sense that when we notice something good that children have done, whether it's in the classroom, in the playground, or over the kitchen table, or at home, that we're really carefully saying what it is that we've noticed. So well done, Ruby, for staying in when all of your mates were out kicking a football. Or well done, I really noticed the way you spent that extra time practicing your music piece for the school assembly, or whatever it might be. So really specific praise, so that more and more I, as the child, remember the third of those 3 things that I was talking about earlier on, my sense of self, my sense of myself as a learner is shifting. I'm beginning to think that I have ownership of my discretionary time and effort, and it really matters how I spend my time. I've recently been working with a new organisation called Marvellous Me that has done some very clever thinking about how we can use smart apps to communicate with our children. And it's two-way, so parents can download an app very easily, and schools can, of course, download the app, but also use a system which enables them to communicate with little time spent with all the children in a particular class. And it's a very simple way of overcoming that very scary question that I remember when my children come home, and I try and stop myself asking that very dull moment of thought where you say, how was school today? Which is it's a nice thing to say, but ultimately as your children get older, it's a dull thing to say. If you're always asked, I mean, luckily my family don't always ask me, how was work today? They engage with me, and then gradually it comes out, something that I'm doing or something that they're interested in. So if you're able to know something that your child has done and immediately start talking about that, the level of the conversation that you can have is quite different. So if your teacher has messaged you through the app to say that Ruby painted a lovely picture today, or Ruby was really helpful or kind today, or Ruby was really curious in the way she kept going at something, then you can go straight in there, and the level of conversation is that much more sophisticated. So you might like to think about this and other things like that. So our topic today is parental engagement, and I've been walking you round some of the things that matter here. I've suggested that it really counts, it improves attainment, it improves behaviour, and it helps learners become even better learners. I've suggested that there are a number of ways as a school you can begin to think about the way that you organise your relationships with parents. I've given you just a few examples of those. In the last part of this conversation with you, I want to summarise what we know from the evidence here, and then I want to stand back and I want to invite you to think about how you might like to make your work in parental engagement even more thoughtful, even more strategic in the way that you plan it. So here's what the evidence says, and nothing here I suspect will surprise you, because point number one is really what you always see about anything that you do in school. In other words, if you're going to do this, do it seriously. Do it in a whole school way. Really go through the kinds of normal needs analysis and priority setting and have some measures in place so that you can really be clear that what you're doing arises from your particular context. And notice the last part there, public awareness raising. This communication thing I've been talking about is really important at home. It's really important between the home and school. And it's really important that the school proactively thinks how it can raise awareness about its strategy. Second is a leadership point. And again, you wouldn't expect to see anything that we do in school not having a leadership component. But here, I think it's particularly important at secondary school. It's important that people who have other important responsibilities also have a responsibility for parental engagement. It's important that somebody, as well as the head teacher, in the senior leadership team, has this responsibility for parental engagement. It's important that somebody on the governing body takes this really seriously. I don't just mean a parent governor, if you have one. The third, and again, this won't surprise you, anything that really matters, we need to build capability in our staff, is that this takes training. It's a shocking thing to admit to you, but when I trained to be a teacher many decades ago, I only had one hour session on how to deal with parents. So in the whole year of my postgraduate training, I discovered a world of interesting things about the organisation of schools, about the teaching of English, that was my subject, about this, that and the other. And almost towards the end of it, and in one hour lecture, I learnt all that there might be in place in store for me about parents. How little prepared I was when I then went into my first job and discovered that my ability to forge a relationship with parents, especially when things weren't going well, was so important. And it was my means of building a true, full relationship with young people, because I was teaching in secondary, that were going through things that I didn't know about. And suddenly I knew about it, and we were all working from the same script. This evidence, by the way, comes from an excellent summary from Janet Goodall and John Vorhaus, two superb researchers in this field. Janet Goodall writing, if you search on her, lots of good practical stuff as well today. The fourth area here is that parental engagement, PE, not physical education, although probably that's good too. Parental engagement with children's learning works best when parents receive clear and specific and targeted information. So one little silly thing but important thing is, how often do we stop and ask parents how they'd like to be communicated with? I'll come on to that when I conclude, but I think it's really important. Do I want to receive a text? Does that not work for me? Am I very happy to be in the world of apps, or do I run a mile from that? Is an old-fashioned email better, or do I prefer the scrumpled note in my child's already overfilled bag as a means of communicating, or maybe a quick call? All of those. There's 5 methods I've assumed and I've described, and too often schools don't do that. Technology, we've been talking about all the time, increasingly helpful in lots of different ways, and lots of evidence too that this kind of intervention is going to have a benefit, not just on the kind of things I've talked about already, but on some of the core things that we're all working hard on, namely literacy and numeracy. And there are other things too which I have covered about other aspects of what it is to be a learner, about being engaged, about being motivated, and so forth. Carol Dweck once said this: if parents want to give their children a gift, and in the build-up to Christmas, it's a nice thing to think about. It wouldn't be a wrapped parcel. It would be, I think, teaching children, as Carol Dweck suggests, that they should love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning. That way they'll have a lifelong way to build and repair their own confidence. That's a great gift, isn't it? And that premise is the one I think on which we need to sit a contemporary approach to parental engagement. It's something that few educators would disagree with. It's something that many of us in school classrooms and staff rooms are working at, and something that is a perfect dialogue piece between home and school. Of course, it is possible to do too much of this. It is possible to be the so-called tiger parent, or even a tiger teacher teaching a tiger parent, that your poor, fatigued child here their head asleep on the piano in a wholly understandable, over-practiced sort of way. Or it's just possible, isn't it, to overdo it on the things that we want our children to learn in terms of the basics of maths or grammar, or indeed anything that we might be teaching them. So it's sometimes just worth reminding ourselves that whilst practice is a wonderful thing and essential if we're going to get better at things, just remembering that just as school is there to be enjoyed in and of itself, so childhood is there to be enjoyed, and not assuming that all of our children's time has to be stuffed up with organised work or homework or structured life. I think, and I believe the evidence supports me in this, particularly in the younger years, that play is essential, that unstructured time is essential. I'm a great believer personally in the power of boredom to stimulate creativity. Get the old cardboard boxes out rather than the Xbox out next time your child says she or he is bored. Think about the kind of games you can play and the learning that you can derive from it. I think games, of all the things that we do where learning is embedded, are such a good middle ground between school and home. Here's that well-known quiz show. You may have seen it. You won't see it anymore because it's off the air, but here we go. Who wants to be a millionaire? Don't worry about the answer to what the name of the Earth's atmosphere is, or maybe you've already cracked it. But look at the little green sign in the top right-hand sign of your top right-hand part of your screen. There are the free tactics that you're offered, aren't they? If you get stuck, you go 50-50. It's a pretty neat way of narrowing the odds. You phone a friend. Well, most friends that I've seen on this program are attached to Google, or you ask the audience. That's like asking your peer group. Now, in all senses, those are really helpful. If you get stuck as a parent, you want to be able to narrow down the odds of what's going wrong. If you get stuck as a parent, you want to be able to call somebody else, or look at what Mumsnet might have to say, or the UK PTA organisation. Or you want to just have a chat with somebody in the playground. That's talking to your friends, your peer group, your audience, if you like. So they're really good strategies for becoming more powerful learners. And they're the kind of things I think we need to shift the conversation onto. We need to shift it away from the things that we've historically told, schools have told parents to do. Of course we want parents to show their passionate engagement in the success of their children. And of course, if we're a uniform school, we want them to come to uniform looking well. All of us want them to come well slept and with enough food in their belly. And above all, we want them to come knowing that they're loved and they're secure, and that there's help at hand, an interest at hand, to track the development of all their capabilities, all those 7 C's. So enough of that. Let's just stand back for a second and think not just about some of the very obvious benefits of parental engagement, either from the parent's point of view or the child's point of view or the school's point of view, but now just shifted to some of the ways in which you might go about getting started. This little pamphlet, Engaging Parents Why and How, is something I produced with the SSAT, and it's available from our website. I'll give you the address at the end if you're interested. Here's a step-by-step plan to getting started. I don't really mean started, because of course you're already out of the trap, aren't you? You're started already. So I guess I mean getting started afresh, getting started with a more holistic view of what parental engagement might bring you. So number one, I think it's essential that if you're going to be serious about this, you convene a meeting at which the kind of things I've been talking about are shared. You invite colleagues to bring evidence from their own reading and their own experience to such a meeting. And you can see there's a word there which you may not immediately recognize, compact, and it's an Americanism, and this is derived from some wonderful work undertaken in America, in Connecticut, which I'll refer to in a little bit. I'll give you the reference for that too. A compact is another word for an agreement, because I think one of the things we might like to do is to reconfirm an agreement with our parent body. Here's what we think we're doing, here's what we'd like you to be doing, and both of us might be saying that. And let's write it down, and let's annually look at it and to see whether it fits what we're now trying to do. Second thing I think we inescapably need to do is to designate at least one leader, and a mix of senior and specialist staff and parents as well. I think this is critically important. You might, at this stage, like to take stock in a way that I was suggesting earlier in this talk of the kind of things that you're already doing. So there's a simple survey here which it asks you, what are you already doing? And just by dint of asking those questions, suggests some of the things that you might like to do. Now, all schools are different. Schools are different by age, by phase, by location, by stage of development and confidence and capability and skill. We all go in and out of different situations. So here it's really important that we align what we're trying to do in parental engagement with the wider school development vision, with the kind of inevitable plans that we need to have that show what we're going to do. And to try and make a plan that is accessible, that sits on our website, that is family friendly, that is clear, and that is shaped by our parents in the process and in the use of it. The next few steps are to make sure that this is not a one-off event, that every year group is involved, and that you plan your strategy carefully. You don't try and do everything at once. So you maybe focus in a particular area and you move on, and not trying to do too many things at one time. The next stage is more actively reaching out to maybe some of the families who don't necessarily currently come to school but might do if you made it a little easier. A great idea from this particular Connecticut-based initiative is the welcoming walkthrough. This is a lovely idea where every year parents are invited to come and walk through the school on an ordinary day. They're met by parents champions, I'll come on to them in a minute, by the head teacher, by other teachers and by children, and they're taken on a tour of the school. Not one of those tours when you're shown all the good bits, but one of those tours when you're shown the school on an ordinary day. And then they're brought back to the staff room or a common room or the head's office or the school hall, whatever is convenient, and over a cup of coffee they will debrief the kind of things that they've learnt from that visit. And don't forget the students, don't forget the pupils, don't forget the children. This is something that can sit really well in conjunction with all the other work we're doing in terms of student or pupil voice, and in gaining really good ideas from them as to how they can become more involved in this process. And finally, and here you can see the reference, the Connecticut State Department of Education in the USA. Finally, we need to put it all together, and I think it's really important that we have something that looks as good and as accessible and is nicely designed as all the other things that we produce in schools. Schools are so good at this these days. It's not that difficult, is it, to design something that looks really professional. And then, and here's the tricky thing, we really need to, if we're serious about this, we need to resource it in terms of money, in terms of time, above all in terms of professional development, so that the kind of things that we're talking about actually happen. And we need to market it, market it, market it. We need not to assume that this communication with our imaginary Spot the dog has actually happened. Spot maybe wasn't available, maybe didn't hear, maybe was too busy, maybe was too unhappy, maybe was too stressed, maybe hates school, maybe hated school, maybe hated school as a child, and therefore has almost an allergic reaction when they come anywhere near our school gates today. We need to be thinking about all these different things. And finally, celebrate, 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 celebrate. One of the best ways, of course, of engaging with parents is in acts of celebration. And that could involve food and drink. It could involve an opportunity to hear children talking about the kinds of learning that they're having. One of the most wonderful examples recently I saw was a school that had completely rethought its parental engagement. And rather than have the head teacher or teachers talking to parents, they had children talking to parents on parents' evenings and acting out what it was like to be in a maths lesson where you were taught maths in a way that if you got stuck, you kept going. And if you got stuck, you knew how to ask for help. And all of those things were suddenly so much more real. But above all, people who don't normally come to parents' evenings, parent-teacher consultations, thought this was more like coming to a school play than it was a typical head teacher talking to parents. Don't get me wrong, colleagues, if you're a head teacher watching this, I'm sure you're brilliant at it, but it's just possible, and I speak as somebody who used to do that role, it's just possible that we're not always the best advocates for the things that we're passionate about. So, just before I conclude, I want to just say a few more things, and I want to take a question that we've had already, and if there are any others, I'll deal with that now. But to remind you that this is a resource. It's a resource that's going to be available to you. It'll go up on the Expansive Education website. If you've already expressed an interest, we'll send you the link. And we hope it provides stimulus for further conversation. I've just skimmed the surface. I've just been on the very tip of a really thrilling iceberg here. There are so many good writers and experts and authorities out here. I mentioned Connecticut, and I mentioned the work of, although I didn't name her, of Anne Henderson. And her book with Karen Mapp called Beyond the Bake Sale is a great way of starting, a great way of beginning to shift the conversation into parents not as it were, fundraisers, but parents as seriously concerned, thoughtful people trying to do an even better job in helping schools help their children. So I hope you found something here that's chimed with you, wherever you are. I hope minimally you might like to get involved with the survey that I've suggested that you can download from the report that you can see on the screen now. And here are some of the addresses that you might like to go to, and then I'll just spend a short while answering any questions. So first of all, the top one is the Centre for Real World Learning. Forgive us for that rather ugly URL. Just Google Centre for Real World Learning and you'll land on us. The remainder are really clear. If you want to engage with us, then tweet. In fact, tweet now if you wish to, using the title that isn't on there, which is @EED NET, if you'd like to continue the dialogue. So here's one question to get us going, and it's this. It goes something like this. That's all very well, what you've been saying, but actually the parents I want to engage with are the ones who don't want to engage with me. And they're the ones I really want to have coming to school, and they're the ones who don't want to come to school. They're the ones who find school an awkward place to be. So what might you do? Well, here are just some examples. I've mentioned the welcoming walkthrough. That's not a bad idea. And I've mentioned using children as demonstrators rather than adults. Here are two others. One is to set a space that isn't a school, that's a neutral space. It could be a community hall or even a pub or a church or a mosque or somewhere that's not an obvious location. And use that as the place where you invite parents to come and talk to you. The other very, very simple thing is to somewhere, and maybe not too obviously, but possibly close to the reception or somewhere at primary level where we must make this kind of inroads, create a space that is owned by parents. Create a place that is for parents, that is full of resources that they can borrow at will. And I said I'd mention this earlier on. What about identifying parents who just, and we all know who these people are, have a knack of engaging other parents? Let's call them parent champions. It's much better if this impetus for a different conversation comes from parents. So identify those members of your parent body who are natural communicators, who are the kind of people, if you're at primary level, you see hanging around the school gates, always there, maybe a little early, chatting in a nice way to others. Find them, make a conversational opening with them and see if you can engage them in being your advocate. So just some starters to get you going. One more thought I have for you. One of the things that we get asked is this. In the current world, so much emphasis seems to be on success in examinations. And my child isn't an examination-shaped child and isn't yet doing that. How do I help? What do I do? How might I have a different conversation with the school? And interestingly, that was the kind of conversation that Guy Claxon and I had most often with parents and children and young people we interviewed for Educating Ruby. And I think it's a tricky one. And I think one of the things we might start to do is to recognise that another place where we can gather between home and school isn't the classroom, it isn't even the school grounds. It's in all the extracurricular activities that happen. Maybe activities in the community, community sports, community dance, community arts work. Maybe it's some kind of volunteer group, a scout group, a guide group, whatever it is. So one of the things we might like to do is to find groups that exist out there and organisations that exist and opportunities for children and their parents to do things together in a place that's neither school nor home, where they're learning some of these capabilities and maybe just slightly rebooting their confidence. Because there's no doubt that children in this highly pressurised world will need all those subjects that they will have to take exams in. And there are ways in which we can help them to get better at those. And it would be a terrible thing if the kind of 7 C's that we're talking about for Ruby to develop became an alternative to English and maths and science and geography and history. So one of the things I think we can do is to bring these worlds together, is to suggest that it is absolutely possible, in fact it's school's moral duty today, to make school a place where you can be the best you can possibly be in maths and science and geography, and forgive me if I've not mentioned your favourite subject, but also where you can learn how to be more confident and more curious and more of a craftsperson and all those other words beginning with the letter C. So I hope you've found something here that you might choose to use as a spur for your activity in further improving all of your work with parents, families and carers. Thank you for listening.